The courtroom smelled like old paper and disinfectant, the kind of place where emotions weren't supposed to leak out, where everything was meant to stay contained inside folders and transcripts. I sat at the defendant's table with my hands folded so tightly in my lap, my fingers had gone numb. I kept my eyes forward, fixed on the dark wood of the judge's bench, because I already knew what would happen if I looked to my left. That's where my mother was sitting. She hadn't looked at me once since we walked in. Not in the hallway, not when we passed through security, not even when the bailiff called my name and everyone stood. She stared straight ahead like I was a stranger who just happened to share her last name. The case wasn't even supposed to be this dramatic. On paper, it was dry. Property dispute, alleged misuse of funds, family trust complications. Words that sounded small and technical until you realized they were about my entire life being picked apart line by line. My lawyer leaned toward me and whispered, "Just answer what they ask. Don't react to her." I nodded, though my throat was already tight. When my mother was called to testify, she stood up like she'd been waiting for this moment her whole life. Chin lifted, shoulders squared, the same posture she used when she used to lecture me in the kitchen back when I was 16 and still hoping I could do something right. She took the oath without hesitation and sat down, folding her hands neatly on the stand. The opposing attorney asked a few warm-up questions: name, relationship, history with the family trust. My mother's voice was steady, confident, almost rehearsed. Then he asked, "And how would you describe your daughter's involvement with the family assets?" That's when she turned and finally looked at me. Her eyes didn't soften. They hardened. "She's a total disgrace," my mother snapped, her voice echoing off the walls before anyone could stop her. There was a ripple through the courtroom, a sharp inhale from somewhere behind me. My lawyer stiffened beside me. My face burned. I felt every pair of eyes swing in my direction, measuring me against her words, weighing whether they fit. "She's always been irresponsible," my mother continued, emboldened now. "She makes reckless choices, she lies, she manipulates situations to make herself look like a victim. This case is just another example of that pattern." I swallowed, my jaw trembling despite everything I was doing to hold it together. My attorney glanced toward the judge, then back to my mother. "Mrs. Carter, let's focus on—" "No," my mother cut in. "Someone needs to finally say it out loud." I felt something inside me crack, old memories rushing in uninvited. Her standing in my bedroom doorway telling me I'd ruined her reputation, her calling my college acceptance a fluke, her telling relatives I was going through a phase when I started working instead of relying on family money. My lawyer stood. "Objection. This is prejudicial and irrelevant." The judge raised a hand slightly, but my mother wasn't finished. "She doesn't deserve what she's claiming," my mother said, pointing at me now. "She never earned it, she always took shortcuts, and now she wants to stand in a courtroom and pretend she's been wronged?" My chest hurt, not metaphorically, physically, like my ribs were pressing inward. "Mom," I whispered without meaning to. She ignored me. The judge's gavel struck once. "Mrs. Carter," his voice said calmly, "that's enough." But the damage was already done. My name felt stained in the air, like something ugly that couldn't be taken back. I stared down at the table, forcing myself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way my therapist taught me after I finally admitted that my mother's voice still lived in my head rent-free. The judge leaned back in his chair, studying my mother for a long moment. His expression wasn't angry. It wasn't sympathetic either. It was curious. Then his gaze shifted to me. I looked up, our eyes meeting for the first time since the trial began. Something in his expression made my stomach flip. It wasn't judgment. It was recognition, like he was seeing a pattern, not just a person. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the bench. "Mrs. Carter," the the judge said, his voice quieter now, cutting through the room more effectively than shouting ever could. "Before we continue, I need to ask you something." My mother straightened, clearly confident she still had the upper hand. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge glanced down at the file in front of him, then back at her. "Can you explain to this court why the documents submitted last week contradict what you've just said about your daughter's role?" My heart slammed against my ribs. My mother blinked. Just once. And for the first time that day, she didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched so thin it felt like it might snap. My mother's lips parted, then pressed together again. She glanced toward her attorney like she expected him to rescue her, but he was staring down at his notes, flipping pages too fast. That tiny crack in her confidence sent a strange jolt through me, equal parts fear and something dangerously close to hope. "I don't know what you're referring to," she said finally, her voice tighter now. "There must be some misunderstanding." The judge didn't respond right away. He picked up a document from the stack in front of him, adjusted his glasses, and read quietly. The room held its breath. I could hear the faint hum of the lights overhead, the shuffle of shoes somewhere behind me, my own pulse pounding in my ears. "You submitted a sworn statement," the judge said, still looking down, "asserting that your daughter never had authorization to manage or access the trust accounts." My mother nodded. "That's correct." He flipped a page. "Yet here we have email correspondence, dated over a 5-year period, where you instruct her to do exactly that." I felt my hands curl into fists in my lap. My mother's head snapped toward her attorney. "I don't remember those emails." The judge looked up then. "You don't remember," he repeated evenly, "or you're saying they're not authentic." Her jaw tightened. "I'm saying she could have altered them. She's very good with technology." A low murmur rippled through the gallery. I sucked in a breath, my chest burning. There it was, the pivot, the way she always turned things back onto me when the ground started slipping under her feet. My lawyer was on his feet instantly. "Your Honor, we have metadata verification and server logs from the original provider. These documents were obtained directly through subpoena." The judge raised a hand, silencing him, his gaze never leaving my mother. "So, you're suggesting," he said slowly, "that your daughter forged years of correspondence, anticipated future litigation, and planted this evidence long before any dispute arose?" My mother hesitated. Just a fraction of a second, but it was enough. "She's manipulative," my mother said, her voice rising. "She always has been. She's been planning this for years." The gavel struck once, sharp, final. "Mrs. Carter," the judge said, firmer now, "control yourself." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. I wanted to speak, to stand up and finally say everything I'd swallowed for decades, but I stayed still. I'd learned the hard way that interrupting her only ever fed the fire. The judge turned his attention to me. "Miss Carter," he said. I flinched at the sound of my name. "Yes, Your Honor," I managed. "Were you acting under your mother's instruction when you handled those accounts?" My mouth went dry. I felt my mother's eyes on me now, sharp and warning, like when I was a child and she'd silently dared me to contradict her in public. "Yes," I said. My voice trembled, but I didn't look away. "Every time." My mother scoffed. "She's lying." The judge didn't even glance at her. "Did you ever receive compensation for this work?" "No," I said. "She told me it was my responsibility as her daughter." Something flickered in the judge's eyes. Not anger, not sympathy, calculation. "And when did the conflict between you begin?" I took a breath. "When I asked for written clarification, when I wanted boundaries." My mother laughed, sharp and bitter. "That's not what happened." The judge finally turned back to her. "Then perhaps," he said calmly, "you'd like to explain why the trust amendment filed 3 months after that request removes your daughter entirely." My heart lurched. My lawyer's pen froze mid-note. My mother's face went pale. "That amendment," the judge continued, "was notarized under unusual circumstances. circumstances this court takes very seriously. The room felt like it was tilting. I could barely process what he was saying, only that something big was unfolding, something I hadn't even known to look for. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time in my life, she looked unsure. The judge leaned forward again, folding his hands. Before we proceed, I'm going to call for a brief recess. A wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom as people stood. The bailiff announced the break, and suddenly the room exploded into motion. My lawyer leaned toward me, his voice urgent. "Did you know about that amendment?" I shook my head, my heart racing. "No." Then we may have just crossed into something else entirely. Across the aisle, my mother was whispering furiously to her attorney, her eyes darting toward me, then away. She looked smaller somehow, cornered. As the judge left to leave, he glanced back at the file on his bench, then at me. That look told me everything and nothing at the same time. Whatever he's seen in those documents, it wasn't over. It was just getting started. The recess didn't feel like a break. It felt like the calm eye of a storm that was still forming. I stayed seated while most people filed out. My legs didn't trust me yet. My lawyer stepped away to make a call, his voice low and fast, and suddenly I was alone at the table with nothing but the sound of my own breathing and the weight of what the judge had just said pressing down on me. Across the room, my mother stood in a tight circle with her attorney. Her hands were shaking. Not dramatically, just enough that I noticed. She kept smoothing the front of her blazer like she could iron reality back into shape if she tried hard enough. When her eyes met mine, she didn't look angry anymore. She looked desperate. I looked away first. That alone felt like a victory, but it scared me too, because desperation had always been her most dangerous state. My phone buzzed in my purse. I hesitated, then pulled it out. Unknown number. Don't answer anything else without counsel. The amendment isn't the only issue. My pulse spiked. I typed back with shaking fingers. Who is this? 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Unknown number. Someone who tried to warn you. Before I could respond, my lawyer returned, his face pale in a way I hadn't seen before. "We have a problem," he said quietly, leaning close. "What kind?" I whispered. "The kind that changes the scope of the case," he replied. "That amendment your mother filed, it may have been backdated." My stomach dropped. That's illegal." "Yes," he said, "and if the judge is already circling that, it means he's seeing a pattern." Across the room, my mother suddenly raised her voice, not yelling, laughing. Too loud, too forced. "She's always been dramatic," she said to no one in particular. "You know how she is." Her attorney touched her arm, murmuring something urgent. She shrugged him off. The bailiff called for everyone to return to their seats. As we stood, my mother leaned across the aisle, close enough that only I could hear. "You think you've won something," she hissed. "You have no idea what you've just started." My chest tightened. "What did you do?" I whispered. Her smile was thin, sharp. "Ask your precious judge." The judge returned, settling back into his chair with deliberate calm. He scanned the room, then looked directly at my mother. "Mrs. Carter," he said, "during the recess, additional information was brought to my attention." My breath caught. "This court has reason to believe that there may be discrepancies, not only in documentation, but in testimony." My mother's attorney stood abruptly. "Your Honor, we object to—" "Sit down," the judge said, not raising his voice. The attorney froze, slowly sat. The judge turned his gaze to me again. "Miss Carter, after the session, I may have further questions for you, questions that could significantly alter how this case proceeds." I nodded, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. Then he looked back at my mother. "And Mrs. Carter," he said, leaning forward just enough to make the room feel smaller, "you should understand that if what I'm seeing is accurate, this matter may extend far beyond a family dispute." The words hung there, heavy, ominous. My mother swallowed. For the first time since I'd known her, She didn't interrupt. The judge lifted his gavel. "We will now resume," he said. And as the courtroom settled back into silence, I realized something chilling. Whatever my mother had tried to erase from the record had just been dragged into the light, and I still didn't know how far it went. The judge adjusted the stack of papers in front of him like he was buying himself a moment. I could tell he was choosing his next words carefully, and that scared me more than if he'd sounded angry. Anger burns fast. Careful burns slow. "Ms. Carter," he said again, and every muscle in my body locked, "I'm going to ask you some questions. Answer only what you know to be true." "Yes, Your Honor," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. "Did your mother ever instruct you to destroy, alter, or withhold records related to the trust?" I felt my mother's stare hit the side of my face like heat. This was it. This was the line she'd never let me cross growing up, the unspoken rule. We protect the family. We don't talk. "No," I said. Then, after a beat, "But she told me not to keep copies." A murmur spread through the courtroom again. My mother shook her head violently. "That's not what I meant," she snapped. "She's twisting my words." The judge didn't react. He just nodded slightly as if filing the information away. "And when you asked for clarification in writing, what was her response?" I swallowed. "She said I was being ungrateful, that if I didn't trust her, maybe I didn't deserve to be involved at all." My mother laughed again, that same brittle sound. "You see, always the victim." The judge finally looked directly at her. "Mrs. Carter, I will remind you again, outbursts will not help your position." She crossed her arms, lips pressed tight, but her foot was bouncing now. She couldn't hide that. The judge turned back to me. "After you were removed from the trust, did you receive any formal notice?" "No," I said. "I found out when my access stopped working." My lawyer leaned closer, whispering, "Good, keep going." The judge exhaled slowly. "That amendment," he said, tapping the file, "was executed on a date when you were still acting as administrator." My heart skipped. "That's impossible," my mother said sharply. "She'd already been removed." The judge raised an eyebrow. "According to your own filings, no such removal occurred until weeks later." My mother's attorney stood again. "Your Honor, if I may." The judge cut him off with a look. "You may sit." The room went dead silent. I felt like I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't see the bottom of. Every answer pulled the thread tighter, and I didn't know what would unravel first, her story or the version of my childhood I'd been forced to live with. The judge leaned back in his chair, studying my mother now with open scrutiny. "Mrs. Carter, were you advised by anyone to alter the effective date of that amendment?" My mother's face flushed. "Absolutely not." "Did you notarize it yourself?" "No." "Then who did?" She hesitated. Just a second too long. I felt it in my bones, that pause, that tiny fracture. "I don't recall," she said finally. The judge nodded, once, not in agreement, in acknowledgement. "Memory lapses tend to occur at inconvenient times," he said evenly. My phone vibrated again in my purse. I didn't look at it, but the weight of it felt heavier now, like it knew something I didn't. The judge glanced at the clock on the wall, then back at both of us. "This court will be requesting additional records, bank logs, notary registries, communications related to the amendment." My mother's attorney leaned toward her, whispering urgently. She shook her head, whispering back, her voice sharp and panicked. The judge lifted his gavel slightly, not striking it yet. "And," he added, his eyes settling on my mother, "depending on what those records show, this court may be compelled to take further action." I felt my breath catch. "What kind of action?" my mother asked, her voice suddenly small. The judge didn't answer right away. He looked at me instead. And in that moment, I realized something terrifying and undeniable. This was no longer just about money or control or even the trust. Whatever my mother had done, it had consequences she could no longer manage. The gavel came down once. "We will adjourn for today." My mother turned toward me as people began to stand, her expression unreadable. "This isn't over," she said under her breath. I didn't respond, because for the first time, I wasn't sure she was talking to me anymore, and I had a feeling the next time we were in that courtroom, the truth wouldn't be optional. The courtroom emptied slower than before, like everyone sensed something unfinished hanging in the air. I stayed seated until my lawyer gently touched my arm. My legs felt weak as I stood, my body finally registering how close I'd been to breaking apart in front of everyone. As I gathered my things, the judge called my name one last time. "Ms. Carter." I turned back. The room was almost empty now. My mother stood near the door with her attorney, watching us from a distance, her face tight, unreadable. "Yes, Your Honor," I said. He didn't speak loudly. He didn't need to. "I want you to understand something," he said. "What happens next will not be decided by emotions. It will be decided by records, timelines, and facts." I nodded. He paused, then added, "And facts have a way of surfacing no matter how deeply they've been buried." Something in his tone told me this wasn't reassurance. It was a warning. Outside the courtroom, my mother brushed past me without a word. No insults, no accusations, just silence. That scared me more than anything she'd said inside. My lawyer exhaled slowly. "You did well," he said, "but this case just changed lanes." "Is that good?" I asked. He looked at me carefully. "It means the truth is bigger than either of you planned for." My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. "She never thought you'd make it this far." I stared at the screen, my fingers cold. "Who are you?" I typed back. This time, the reply came instantly. "You'll find out soon. And when you do, you'll understand why your mother was so afraid of that letter and those dates." I looked up just in time to see my mother step outside, her shoulders hunched, her confidence finally gone. For the first time, she looked like someone running out of places to hide. As we walked down the courthouse steps, the weight of everything settled in. Not relief, not victory, anticipation. Because whatever the judge had seen in those files wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of something my mother had spent her whole life trying to prevent. And soon, whether she liked it or not, the truth would have a voice. Guys, the next part of this story will come soon and will come on this channel. So please subscribe to the channel, press the bell, like, and share it. Thanks!